everybody, and welcome to Whiskey at Work.
This is another one of your bad ideas.
This is a bad idea because I'm drinking what you paid for. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Whiskey at Work. Oh, these are my favorite ones to do when all four of us are here. And I don't just have to deal with Rob the whole time.
Thanks a lot.
You guys make it so much better.
Oh, wow.
Joining us is,
I
of course...
still bought this whiskey. I don't...
Wait a minute. This was a company card one. Because when I pulled it out of the bag, the first thing you said was, don't lose the receipt.
Doesn't mean I didn't buy it.
So, Dan Bruner from Timmins Market in
Hello.
Valley and in Box Elder. And, of course, Gabe Aldridge, our brand new expert in all things this that we're drinking here, the Japanese whiskey. Right? Did I oversell that, Gabe?
No.
Would you call yourself?
No. Maybe undersell it a little bit.
would you call yourself an expert here? Well, this is kind of this is where it all started for you, right? This is kind of how we got introduced to you a little bit through the Dakota Whiskey Territory Facebook group. And we learned through that you are kind of a Japanese whiskey not kind of. I would say it's all the way, isn't it?
Oh, this is my wheelhouse. Hell yeah.
So you're in the military, you're in the Air Force, and that's, I'm assuming, what led you to Japan.
Yeah. So, I was stationed over there in 2016. I was there from 2016 to late 2021. And it was over there that I really started to fall in love with whiskey, specifically Japanese whiskey and Scotch whiskey. But yeah, Japanese whiskey, I went down a very deep rabbit hole.
Well, and that's why we wanted to have you in for this, because I think we kind of want to do maybe a 3 or 4 part sampling of this stuff, because Rob and I don't know a lot about it, and Dan, I don't know what your knowledge of it really is, even being the seller of all of this.
Yeah, very limited, and honestly, until we opened by the base, it was not something we had explored a ton, but we have more traveled people that are shopping out there, and so we've expanded our Japanese and our Scotch, and it's been interesting and kind of fun to get into some of these categories as well.
So is it considered traveling if you're forced to go?
Maybe not.
That's maybe a better question for Gabe, but
right?
I can't comment on that.
Well, but that makes sense. Your Box Elder store is, of course, right next to an Air Force base.
Correct.
So you're going to have all of these different kinds of people that are coming through. And it seems to make sense to kind of expand on something like that, right?
Yep, it's worked out well for us so far.
Okay, excellent.
Gabe has forced your hand, getting out of the bourbon comfort zone a little.
One day.
Well, Gabe, when you were in Japan, were a lot of the guys you were stationed with, were they just like all beer drinkers, or did they kind of get into, is this something that's really kind of unique to you? Why were you drawn to this? Why were you drawn to start a whiskey journey?
So, yes.
Okay.
So, no, we talked about before, I was like, I need a hobby. Why not alcoholism? No, I said, I need a hobby, something I can,
Yes, Uncle Sam appreciates that.
develop. Yeah, don't tell them.
Yeah.
But something I can develop a skill set and teach other people about. And I found whiskey, and then I found Japanese whiskey, and then I found like-minded friends through groups over there and just going to tastings and doing reviews. And I was soon the guy to go to for whiskey for my squadron over there. They were not whiskey people by the time I left. About everyone had a little whiskey collection going. So
nice.
I was real proud of that.
To get them going?
Seems to be what happens wherever I go.
So then why did you... I suppose, you're in Japan, and of course that's what's going to be all around you. Did you start with scotches and bourbons? The Scotch version and then the American version, and then go to be like, well, okay.
Yeah, I started with scotches, specifically Highland Park was one of the things. I think the first actual Scotch I had tried before, and same thing with the bourbon and the rye side. I think Bullet Bourbon, Bullet Rye were some of the first things I started with. Japanese whiskey, though, it wasn't until I think it was a pour of Yamazaki 12 that I was like, oh, this is really good. I love this stuff. And then I just found out the history around it, and of course over there Japanese whiskey is something that's highly sought after, so that kind of drew me to it. Like, okay, well, I'm over here, what things can I get here that I wouldn't be able to get stateside?
Do they just call it whiskey over there?
They call it all, and that's so Japanese whiskey is very weird. And I think you guys may have touched on this last time, and in the last time you guys talked about this. Japanese whiskey rules are very laxed. Practically, there aren't none.
Right.
Aren't any. I mean, it wasn't until mid 2021 when they came out with that JSMA regulations, but even that, it was more of a starting point. To fall into those rules, to even apply to you, you have to be part of that association. It's not legally binding to all whiskey coming out of Japan. It's only people who are part of that association.
Well, and you mentioned the Yamazaka, right?
Yamazaki.
Yamazaki. And wasn't that, I think, kind of technically the first in like 1923, 24, somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Was that, I mean, it was
Yeah,
one
that
of
was the first distillery opened by Suntory, which that name comes from the person who founded it, Shinjiro Tori. He inherited a lot of money from his dad, and I think he originally was making plum wine, some sort of wine. And then the market for Japanese whiskey wasn't really there. They had Japanese whiskey, but it was all mixed with additives and who knows what was in it. And he wanted to start the first legitimate Japanese whiskey category, made in Japan, distilled in Japan, aged in Japan. And that's what led him to go out and find people who he can surround himself with. And one of those people goes down as probably the legend in Japanese whiskey, and that's Masataka Taketsuru. He was trained in Scotland for many, 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 many years, and Shinjiro hired him to come back and work for him, and eventually started Suntory.
Okay.
With Yamazaki.
Now, it's what's kind of interesting about that is that almost is a really similar path to when bourbon and whiskey first started here, when you go back to kind of the Old West, where they were mixing it with,
Formaldehyde,
yeah,
pickled pig's feet.
Exactly, before the Bottled in Bond Act happened.
Didn't know what it was going to get aged in, or
Right.
Well, same thing with Scotch way back.
Yeah, when they were putting it in the fish head barrels.
Yeah, used barrels of varying things.
Is that why you don't like it, Dana? Maybe you were getting the wrong kind of scotch.
Maybe I was drinking fish head scotch.
I don't know where you were buying it from. I mean, you've got connections. It's not the guy behind your store there, or somewhere else that you can get good stuff.
Right.
Okay. Well then, really, like you said, it had no rules. Japanese whiskey really was just kind of a free for all, but it's kind of broken out now into two major or main companies in Japan that are doing it right. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that was definitely the case when it first started. Now, I mean, there are so many up and coming smaller distilleries going on in Japan now. As I was leaving, a lot of them were coming up, and I never got to try a lot of them, but now we are starting to see smaller distilleries do things the right way. But yeah, I mean, originally Suntory with Shinjiro Tori and Masataka Taketsuru. Funny enough, Masataka, the original whiskey they put out was made in the fashion that Masataka was trained in, which was very Scotch-like. And the Japanese weren't the biggest fans of it. They wanted something.
Turns out I'm Japanese.
Yeah, you might be. I'll bring some Lafroig next time and we can rehash that. But yeah, it was made in the image of Scotch. And they weren't a huge fan of it, so Shinjiro wanted to make something new. And that's really when Yamazaki started to become its own. It's very floral, very pretty, very light, bright fruits. But Masataka wasn't the biggest supporter of that idea. He did later on eventually start Hakushu under Suntory, which is the second malt distillery from Suntory. So Yamazaki and Hakushu, or Hagushu, however you want to pronounce that. And then they have a third distillery called Chita, and that's what produces a lot of their grains. And that is what's in this bottle. This is a mixture of Chita, their single grain, and Hakushu and Yamazaki. This one is a little different, though. The other famous blend they have is Hibiki. Hibiki Harmony is probably the most common one you can get here. This one is, ingredient-wise, as far as what's in it, the exact same as Hibiki, except this has a higher proportion of Chita the grain component, and a higher proportion of hakushu in it, and not as much Yamazaki.
So what we're drinking is the Suntory, the Toki is what it is, which you can find around here. And that's kind of why we wanted to start with this. I know, Dan, you have this.
Correct. Yeah.
Both locations, I mean, it can be.
Yes.
You could have it at both easy. And
I'm sure I was looking at the wrong thing at the first store.
None of us are surprised by that.
I didn't think anybody would be. I just wanted to admit it.
I just think this is a great one to start with because it does generally feel like a lighter Japanese whiskey. It is a sweeter Japanese whiskey too. I mean, what do you like this, Dan?
Yeah.
Is this something you would keep and drink? Not being a big Scotch fan, obviously, but I mean, what's your take?
It definitely leans towards the flavor profile of some of the Scotches that we've tried that I did enjoy, versus some of them that are more heavily peated. Still not sure I'm ready for a revisit of Talisker 18 anytime soon. I think I still have residual
Still
ash
repeating
in my
on you,
mouth
doesn't it?
from 4 years ago.
She has nightmares of me chasing him with a Lafroy bar.
Right. Well, what do you think about it, Rob?
I think the smell on this thing is amazing. It's just super light and floral, but it doesn't, and it has a bit of a sweet taste to it, but it's not flowery on the palate. That kind of freaks me out when you smell that floral. You don't want to necessarily taste the flower part of it, right? This doesn't have the. It's to quote the glass. It is very swallowable. I mean, to me, I like this a lot. I can't believe I don't have a bottle of it at home.
Well, I like the first little sip I take of it. Almost gave me like a Sour Patch Kid taste in a good way. In that way where you take that first bite of kind of like a sour apple or a sour, apple, I guess is really the best way I could describe it. And then you get that nice light finish. And, Dan, I know you like more of a linger, more of a burn, and you're not going to get any of that with this at all. But flavor wise, everything for me is, right in the front. And then that swallow feels nice. And it's scotchy. I mean,
It's a light scotchy,
right?
Though.
Exactly.
The first sip got me a little, but after
this is very similar to the Compass box we had.
I would agree.
That's it. There you go.
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be, but what in a blend like this? How much? What is the blend? Do you know for sure?
So it's a blend of their two single malts, Yamazaki Hakushu, and their Cheetah Grain whiskey. They don't release proportions exactly. They don't release exactly what barrels. I would probably guess that this is a high component of ex-bourbon barrels. But I do know it is more on the grain and Hakushu side. Funny enough, though, too, is blended Japanese whiskey is different from blended Scotch and blended bourbons. As in, Japanese distilleries, or I should say companies, do not work with each other. For example, if you have a blended whiskey from Japan, chances are it's a blend of all of Suntory's distilleries. If you have a blended whiskey from Japan that's Nikka related, it's all Nikka's distilleries. They do not work well together. It's not like in Scotch where, for example, Johnny Walker, it's a blend of several different distilleries across different companies, all kinds of stuff.
Well, and maybe that lends to why, in 90 years, a little over 90 years, this has really taken off. I mean, it's, in the last decade to 15 years, I think somewhere in there, this has won almost more awards. Not this particular one. I'm just saying Japanese whiskey in general.
Well, and this one too, this one's interesting because this one in Japan is very expensive. And here's why. Because this was created for the U.S. market. They don't want to sell it in Japan. This is marketed for the U.S. market and for the highball market. This was made for highballs, not for drinking like this.
I don't think I would like it in a highball.
They should revisit that.
I think so.
Well, and the reason is it was marketed towards the U.S. market, but the highball idea came from the boom of highballs from the Indian market. And India is one of the highest buyers of whiskey.
Okay.
And that's where this idea came about. In the Toki, it means time. And this originates from a very, very popular advertisement using a very famous U.S. actor, Bill Murray. Suntory time.
No way.
Suntory time.
Bill Murray's the one.
Bill Murray is the one. If you look at the most famous Japanese whiskey in the world, in my opinion, Hibiki 17, Suntory Time was part of a movie that Bill Murray was in. I forget what the movie was called, but they took that and ran with it.
Was it Lost in Translation?
Yes, Lost in
Oh,
Translation.
I suppose. Yeah. That would make perfect sense.
Suntory Toki Time. Suntory Time.
Got it. Well, it is delicious, and it's interesting too that Japanese whiskey will spell their whiskey without the E, much like Scotch will as well. So it's you can taste the influence of Scotch because, like I said, that's where most of it was learned. And
Well, Japan doesn't have an E in it.
He looked at me and said that like I was an idiot, right?
Well,
He
Scotch
looked at
doesn't
me-
have an E in it, or Scotland doesn't have an E in it. Ireland has an E in it. America has an E in it.
That's a very loose rule when it comes to determining
Seems to
that.
work here, though, don't it?
It does. You're right. God, Rob. All right. So next week,
You started it.
I think we want to. Does this seem right, Gabe? We want to bring out the Nika coffee grain whiskey. What can you tell me about that before
That
we drink it next week?
is
the
widely
label's
known.
not near as cool as the.
No, but the bottle color is much prettier.
Dumb. This is widely known as the Japanese bourbon.
The Nika coffee grain, really? Well, Rob, aren't you going to be excited next week?
Just make sure we bring the Toki in too.
Okay, God.
It's coffee.
Dan?
If it tastes anything like coffee, it's going to be a deal.
See, you're wrong already. I'll
Okay.
explain why.
Yes,
All right.
thank you, Gabe. I
Perfect.
need you in here for just more of that.
Because coffee is not spelled like coffee.
Oh,
Coffee
stop
must
it.
be a person.
Dan, it's every day. Every day I work with this. You get to come in once a month and have to put up with it. I want to thank you for the glasses, Dan. That's how we're going to move on.
Great segue.
That's why we keep him, folks.
No, Dan brought in these glasses for all of us, and they do have the hashtag swallowable on them, which I want to make a thing so bad. I don't know if it's ever going to be a thing, but Dan, you've given me the great first step
There we
to
go.
make that happen. So I appreciate
I just ran across, oddly enough, today while looking for something else. I had T-shirt designs kind of mocked up after Kelsey said that 2 years ago.
that. Right. Well, let's get back to that.
Yeah,
Let's
we
see
might
what
have
happens.
to revisit that.
Also, really quick, Dan, I want to thank you again for those bottles that you donated for the Children's Miracle Network. Dustin and Eric from Sioux Falls were both the winners, and we managed to raise $131 for both of those bottles. So thank you, man. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Very cool.
Yeah, it was
Easy to
very
do.
cool. Thank you. Gabe, buddy, thank you for coming in with this again. I'm excited for the rest. Do you know what your two surprises are going to be for us yet? If we move down the road, which one you really want us to experience? Do you
you
know what
don't
that's
have to
going to be?
say it. Do you just know?
That's true. You don't have to say it yet.
Don't
you
tell
can
him.
surprise
He'll
us.
screw it up.
As far as Japanese,
Yes.
I have an idea.
Okay. Awesome. Very good. Thank you guys
You know,
so
when
much.
when you rock back and forth in your chair there, it makes everybody else think you're on a merry-go-round
Does it?
when you're talking.
This is nice though. I get anxious when I talk,
See?
so I gotta move.
Stop it.
It's Dan Bruner from Timmins Market. It's Gabe. I just want to say it's Gabe from the Air Force.
Heyo.
Hey, speaking of which, you have
And Rob.
yeah, thanks a lot. You have a big event coming up this weekend.
I do. I'll be there.
Do you have to work it? You have stuff you got to do?
Will be working it. Yep.
There-
I am beer booth A.
Beer booth A.
Come on down, get a beer.
So we'll get flasks full of whiskey and have real drinks.
By beer booth, whiskey booth.
Okay, perfect. They're estimating, tens of thousands of people
It's going to be busy.
at this thing this weekend.
It is going to be busy.
The Ellsworth Air Force Base Air Show, which is the first one we've had in,
Decade, isn't it?
yeah, it's been quite a while, so I'm excited for it. Again, thank you guys very much. It is Whiskey at Work. Thanks so much for hanging out with us.